you so much for coming today and this evening and making the time. I have some half an hour or so of a monologue. I hope it doesn't put you to sleep. If it does, please raise your hand and I will remove an item of cloak. Good, no hands raised. The talk is in just a few parts. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and my initial company, PlayGen, which I set up in 2001, what we do, what I've been doing, the kind of things that kind of makes me tick. Then I'm going to talk about the area, this wonderful tech city of ours as it's now known, otherwise known as kind of East London and sort of Greater Shoreditch, if you like. And I'll introduce some of the elements that I think have made the area to what it is today, and I'll finish up by discussing some of the things that we're doing in Digital Shoreditch, what we're up to, what we're planning, and a big warm invitation for you all to join us this year. We're then going to pass over to some good while for questions and discussions, and I sincerely hope that you all join in, and it's a conversation that we can have collectively rather than me just responding to questions, and we can actually get some interesting dialogue going. So with that as a preamble, this is my first company, set up in 2001 in Shoreditch, on Shoreditch High Street, of all places, almost opposite the church, with this idea that we would convert boring stuff into pure magic. So what are we talking about? Well, we make games, and we make games on topics that you may not immediately think are playful, or even things that you should play with. But we do it to influence behaviour, we do it to engage particularly young audiences, but right across the range, whether it's enterprise or you know, as you wish, whether it's school children or academics, or whether it's folks who work in a factory, or parents with young children. Up there I've put up some of the topics which we've made games about. Some are more difficult than others, and it's something that we've been doing for some 11, 12 years. So you'll notice things like teenage pregnancy, or climate change, or even generating new ideas, or probably my favourite, which was to make a game about making games. My nickname at school was basically I was kind of Mr. Play, and I remember at my 11 years old, my form teacher saying to my parents, "Cam's brilliant, just give him 2 grains of sand and he'll have the whole classroom playing a game with it in 10 minutes. I've been obsessed with play and games at a very young age, and I've been experimenting with playful things and things that allow you to play for about some 26 years. That's 1986, and sort of by me making the first game on a Spectrum, and I haven't looked back. So as John kindly mentioned, some of the folks that we work with, this slide is slightly old, but this is even larger, but we tend to work with very large organisations that have intractable or difficult social issues that they'd like people to engage with using some medium of play or interactivity. That tends to be the space we're in, and we spend an enormous amount of time working with many, many universities. You'll see many universities there. UEL is there. QM should make it on there very soon, I hope. And that's part and parcel of what I do. So much I enjoy research that I've now enrolled in a PhD. I thought, you know, whilst I'm doing all this research, I might as well go the whole hog and ruin my life. But for those of you who don't have a PhD, I was going to say raise your hands, but I might get the wrong sequence. We'll just keep that back. So this is my dad in the middle. Actually, no, it's not my dad. Can you imagine if I was your dad for a moment? And I put this slide up to kind of talk about competition, which is one of the elements of gaming, and something that people immediately think about when they think, oh, games, yes, competition, I know that, I want the largest pumpkin. And you may have heard of this wonderful new word that's been bandied around called gamification. Hands up if you, this is just about this question, hands up who's heard of gamification? Okay, the virus is expanding. So this is the notion that we are utterly bored now with our lives, that we somehow need to add play into what we do in order to be engaged with things, and it seems to really be taking off. And if you haven't seen it already, I very much hope and doubt that you won't see it. I'm actually very much sure that you will see it integrated into some of the things that you do coming up. Now, a lot of people are interested in gamification, and this is the kind of the way they see it. So this is a machine that we designed where whatever content or service that you may have goes in at one end, and you add in some motivational elements, some identity and mastery and achievements and a status. You add perhaps some social mechanisms to it. You then put these things called game mechanics in there, like points and levels and rewards, and then through lots of analytics and improvement, outputs this amazing engaging experience that delivers results every time. Yeah, right. I mean, such a wonderful machine exists for books, for writing, and for music. And if you just follow those steps, you're going to have a best-selling novel, and you'll have an album that will go to #1. And if you're making a film, it will be the most watched film of all time. Of course, that's absolute nonsense, and we don't believe this either. We just wanted to kind of highlight the fact that this is not how we think. There's a lot more to it, and the thing that we're mostly interested in is around behavioural economics, this model of the irrational human being that makes decisions not based on rational utility and what they're going to get out of it over a long period, but actually on very ad hoc things that are to do with what other people are doing, or how they would perceive something, and discounting the future for the present, and all sorts of things like that. So the rabbit hole is actually a lot deeper than it seems, and that's quite an area of interest of mine. Because so many people ask, well, how do you gamify things? How do you make games? You know, you've been making games for, what, 25, 26 years. What do you do? What's your process? How does it work? So to answer that question, I could only do one thing, which was to make a game. You know, because if somebody asks you how you do this, well, if you can make games to do anything, which is something I believe, then you should be able to make a game to make games. And I brought 3 packs of these. So it's a card game. I brought 3 packs with me. I have no idea how we're going to decide who gets them. I thought, you know, perhaps the first 3 people that ask a question, or the 3 people who ask the funniest question. There's a game itself. But you're welcome to these, and we'll see how we can dish those out later. There are 52 cards in the deck, and on the pack it says there are 100 million game ideas. That's actually a lie. Mathematically speaking, there's 17.4 billion combinations of games that you can make in this deck. Now, most of us don't realise that it would take something like 52 years to count to 1 billion if you counted a number every second. That's a very long time. So if I said to you 17 billion, it's going to take you a very long time to go through that. So we'd put 100 million on that, a mere 5.5 years of count, making one cheaper. So with that part of me aside, and this, I apologise, might have a marketing feel to it, but trust me, it's part of behavioural economics. Get onto it or you lose out. Otherwise known as FOMO, or fear of missing out. A beautiful, beautiful. This slide is up because these people are scientists, and you all clearly are not scientists because you're not dressed like that. And we know from this slide that this is how scientists dress. So what they're trying to tell us is there's usually 3 reasons for anything. Scientific things are true, there's only ever 3 things for anything, and that's why we've only got 3 packs of cards. But the games side of things, games are engaging, games are rewarding, and games are things that we can let our imagination run wild. Although I don't know exactly how. So with that aside, I want to move to Tech City, or at least what appears to be a Google map of some random part of London. You may recognise some of these street, Great Eastern Street, Shoreditch High Street. This is by no means the boundary of Tech City, which is hotly debated. A few years ago, someone said to me, well, this digital Shoreditch, do you have to be in Shoreditch? Do To which my instinctual response was, Shoreditch is a state of mind. You could be anywhere and wearing, you see a man with a funny haircut and, the beers cost £8 a pint. That's Shoreditch. So it really, and I'm wondering if the same would perhaps apply with Tech City, but I think there are many folk who are trying to put boundaries around it. From what I understand, it's sort of East Londonish. But this talk is more about Shoreditch, I guess, because it's meant to be, in a way, a heart of it, and somewhere that's particularly close to my heart. Now, legend has it, and if you are a historian and you know about the area, please forgive me as I will make enormous leaps of, I'm basically making stuff up. So, but apparently, so the story goes, the place was originally named after the fifth, that is the fifth, right? Fourth. Thank you. Yes, these are the ones on the other side. See? I can't even do my Roman numeral. So Edward IV's Jane Shore. So, it's Shore's. Not quite. It was actually known as Suet because that's where the effluent of London. It was quite literally shit on. No, it's come a long way since then, but it's important to remember that this Shoreditch of ours was once a sewer, and out of the sewers, oh my, what has risen? £60 a square foot. Wow, that's something. But going back to the area is incredibly rich in both culture and the way that it's grown. This is a map from around 1576, and in the top corner you'll notice a couple of little buildings, the Curtain and the Theatre. Now the Theatre is meant to be the very first public playhouse ever built, in the UK. It's an absolutely wonderful story because this chap here, who you may recognise, had some of his first plays performed there, something that you may not know. So this notion of connection and doing interesting things and being sort of on the fringes of creativity has been in the area for as long as, for 400 or 500 years. Fast forward some 300 years from then, or some 250 years, and this is the part of the Regent Canal which basically connected the London docks up through to Shoreditch and Hoxton and Dalston. And one of the terminus of the East Counties Railway opened just off of Shoreditch High Street. This is sort of where the tea building is in that corner. And this became a real centre, a hub of activity in manufacturing. Of course, before that, there was a lot of cloth making. And even around here, there were huge fields of mulberry for silk weavers who were in the area. Now the silk weavers sort of gave way to very interesting new printing companies, and because they were dealing with similar sort of technologies of making cloth and kind of printing, and amazingly creative people like Wells and Company opened their commercial ironworks. I set up Plagian in this building here. Just for reference. But the area was chronic in deprivation, despite all this. And you probably know Charles Booth's 1899 poverty map that showed that some of the most deprived areas of London was, so when you see this is Bethnal Green Road, this is Shoreditch High Street, and the blue and the black is worse, and the black is basically chronic white. This is people on the very edges. A seriously deprived area. So this is Boundary Street in 1890, and following Booth's plans, they put up this wonderful new Boundary Street estate, who you may know is kind of heralded as Britain's first public housing. It was built without a pub to keep the poor sober. Well, they should come to the pubs now that are around. But what was interesting about it is the quality to which these houses were built. Extremely high quality. And that commanded a kind of certain type of individual who would be able to afford to move into these places. So who moved into these places? Furniture makers, people of trade, people who had really good skills and who were creating things. So we had a massive influx of very creative people moving into the area from early 1900s and just before. This is the same corner that we're looking at. We're looking at the photo of this earlier. This is the terminus, and this was really the broadband of 1938. We've replaced that with optic fibre now. We don't need to physically move stuff, but then we did. And there were many of these buildings that were printers, that were furniture makers, that were still making cloth. And in fact, if you go to places like Fashion Street, you can still see there are still people selling cloth. It's like, guys, this moved on a few hundred years ago. Come on. But that's you know, and I guess these things don't change very much. And at this time, London's population literally exploded from sort of the middle of 1850s to the First World War to about 7 million, and all these people needed furniture and they needed all sorts of things. And so this was the place where many people came to make and build stuff. That kind of, this is a cotton warehouse in Shoreditch in 1960, so this stuff was going on. And as you can see, there's the many print workers, many of the machines then lend themselves well to printmaking, which was a nice segue into desktop publishing world, which is the first time that digital companies started to use technology, and they were kind of placed there, and that made one of the links. That, and as well as all the artists having moved into the area, it created a space for people to start experimenting with digital stuff, and that was the link between print and desktop publishing, which was the link between desktop publishing and now the media companies that are there. So in a way, this all goes back a very, very long way, which was kind of the point of me setting out on this journey. That we've come a very long way, and that there are many elements that make the space what it is, and make Tech City what it is. And you know, this is how we do our print these days. You know, granted, it's not quite the same. But the point of this is the still assertion by some that somehow this lovely Shoreditch and Tech City of ours, with this beautiful woven interdisciplinary rich history of all these different things, are somehow the same as Silicon Valley. Well, there's some cheese and there's some chalk. You know, and the kind of a rebuttal to this is going to be Silicon Valley. No, thank you. It's, there's a lot more going on here, and then the area is rich in all types of creativity, be it architecture or printing or digital or furniture, whatever you want. And sometimes the mixture of everything, like companies like Monte Dislas, which kind of mixes CAD/CAM and the latest digital with furniture. So that I felt was something we should highlight. That we're not the same. We don't need to be. There's a lot of wonderful things that are happening. In 2011, I was being nosy. I had already in 2010 commissioned a researcher to find out who was around, which was the kind of start of Digital Shoreditch. I asked a researcher, well, this is where I'm sitting, and I think where I was sitting was roughly about there. And I drew a circle, which was the radius I could walk in 15 minutes. I said, hey, can you go and find out what companies are within a 15-minute walking distance of where I am today? She went away, she came back with a list of 300. I'll be perfectly honest with you, my initial reaction to this was, I bet there are a load of rubbish companies that are in there. And I was amazed, I was astounded by what I was seeing, the Wigan Kennedys of this world, but people who are winning enormous contracts globally for creative strategies, amazing tech companies, billion-pound tech companies in the form of Inmarsat and others. And I was really actually quite surprised at who was there. That was one researcher kind of working alone. So in 2011, I said, right, can you now go around, walk down every street, knock on every door, and ask the question, who's here? What are you doing? And so this time 3 researchers went around on foot. They quite literally knocked on every door and they asked the question, who is here? Because if you rely on Experian or Companies House data, many of the companies have got their headquarters with their lawyers or perhaps in the City of London. We don't know who's around, and there are lots of small companies that kind of slip through the cracks. So this was a kind of a very much underground, let's find out who is here. And that was quite exciting too. So we got around about 700 or 800 companies that we then added to this map, which was put up as the Tech City map, and it's still up, techcitymap.com. If you haven't seen it, I would certainly recommend you go and have a look at it, see who's around. It's rather wonderful. We haven't done the design for it, but the folks at Trampoline Systems actually built it. And it's a wonderful snapshot of the companies and the variety of companies that are around and what they're doing. And following this, of course, there's digital shortage. I'm going at a reasonable pace, John. I don't know if I can stretch this for half an hour, but I don't want to sound boring, but I'll see what I can do. Yes, I know. This is what I'm afraid of. Digital shortage this year. I just want to spend a few minutes talking about what we're up to. This is our biggest year. It's our 3rd year. I almost can't believe that it's our 3rd year, especially since I found out that South by Southwest, which, if you may know, is one of the largest technical and digital-based festivals that happens globally, was smaller in its 11th year than we were in our 2nd. That's extraordinary. They are now in their 20th year. This year they celebrated their 20th year, and they have 27,000 people, which is something quite special. We don't have quite that reach quite yet, but it is a 3-year-old looking at a 20-year-old going, hi, we're going to beat you one day. So those are the dates. We're in our 3rd year. It's 10 days, despite me trying to make it smaller. It seems it's not. It just grows and grows, and we have some absolutely wonderful sponsors, including Queen Mary's, who've actually supported us from the very first year. They were one of the very first people to support us, and they've stood by us year after year. We're absolutely amazed by that, and are very, very grateful for it. And a whole host of others who are supporting us in this journey. I should probably point out that digital shortage is meant to be a kind of a ground-up celebration of the area. It is a not-for-profit. We run it as a true not-for-profit in a way that we try as much as possible to give back to the community what we get, and whatever's left over we try and use to do interesting stuff with people in the community. It will run, well it does, there's now some 1,200 companies and counting who make up digital shortage, and this year our HQ is going to be at the wonderful Shoreditch Town Hall, which seems rather apt for something called digital shortage, where we're going to have something like 400 speakers speaking over this period. So lots and lots of knowledge, lots of luminaries, lots of interesting people talking about lots of things. And what are they talking about? Well, you may have seen this image when you first came in. John asked what it was. Another thing I thought we need is we need a model of Tech City. So we had a 3D artist very simply model it for us in a 3D printable ready format, and there'll be a 3D printer that will be churning this out at digital shortage, and you can have a small one made or a large one made. If there is a real desire for it, we'll get some rubberized ones so you can punch it. If you do so. The first day, which is Monday the 20th, is called What Tech City. It was WTC, which is kind of WTF, WTC, for those who know text. And it's kind of turned into, well, what is Tech City? Who is Tech City? What are the people who are in it? Who are the movers and shakers? What are they doing? What is our collective problems that we'll be having? What are the opportunities that are coming up? How can we work better as a community together? So it's all of those things. That's on our first day, on the Monday. We then follow up with a very, very forward-thinking day called Tomorrow's World, which is really about what's coming up next in technology. technology? What are the new things that are changing the landscape of our digital space? What are the new techs that's coming out? What's the new digital bits and pieces that are coming out? We have a music and film afternoon and evening that day with some live performances. Wednesday is kind of it's a big day for the area because there are so many creative agencies and advertising agencies who work with brands. It's traditionally been the day that always sells out first. It's the day where people phone up and say, I must be there. And we try and tell them that we can't let them in because of fire regulations, and they get very, very, very upset. But this is kind of a looking at future brands. This is a potential image of London as it might be in 2050. I think, planning regulations being what they are, highly unlikely that we'll get that town or the first of the evidence. I certainly hope that our capital may look like that in 40 years' time. Thursday is a day for entrepreneurs and around raising finance. So it's really a day for people who are wanting to hear from other successful entrepreneurs who've raised capital in a whole variety of different ways, who've exited, who've successfully built business, and we have something like 50 entrepreneurs speaking on that day. It should be quite interesting. We will be starting the day by ringing the bell at the London Stock Exchange, so opening the stock exchange, and really as a kind of an inspiration that perhaps some of the companies who are now just in their first years will one day list on the stock exchange and employ hopefully hundreds, if not thousands of people. Friday is a day that's very close to my heart. It's around behavioural economics and behavioural design. It's really a day designed to hear from some of the leading luminaries in the space of influence and influencing people and changing behaviour. And we have a whole raft of people who are very well known, practitioners and theoreticians who work in this space. And it should be interesting if you're in the space of trying to get people to do what you want them to do. This is probably one of the days to come to. And then to round off that particular week, we've got a whole weekend of what we call Make and Do. It's a jam, it's getting everybody together, getting to do stuff together, getting to build stuff and meet, and there's a whole series of challenges which will be presented. I'd love to mention the Ordnance Survey one. Hopefully there will be one. There'll certainly be ones from BBC and other large organisations who want the community and us to respond to what we should be doing with the changes that are happening in this landscape and what their role is and how we can help solve some of their problems. So it's making stuff, but also with nice bits of cash, hopefully, and good connections afterwards that some of the people who engage can do. These numbers are wildly old, but in case you are digitally inclined, please join our LinkedIn group. It's just on digital shortage. We have a Facebook page, facebook.com/digital shortage, and there's a Twitter which is not digital shortage because that was too long. It's just digi shortage. So if you are on Twitter, please follow us. And this is the point of this piece really. Remember the kit. So if you don't go to digitalchurch.com, well, I don't need to say it's the right on the wall. So tonight, when you go to bed, tomorrow morning when you first wake up, think about the kit. And please save it. And with that, here are some sweets. And that's me done. Thank you very much.
So big things about your questions. My first question to you Kev, is, can you say a few things about your actual company and some issues you find that are not being addressed? I mean, I was very interested to know about your works being highly green energy.
Yes. I was quite surprised with that because we don't recruit based on where people are. What university they went to, we purely merit and on IQ. I'm sorry to say that I know it's a terrible way to recruit, but it's important to us that we work with smart folk. And yeah, most of our technical team is Queen Mary, and most of them are from the electrical engineering department. who are not programmers by nature, but they seem to be extremely well versed in logic and being able to work in the environments that we do. I guess what you're alluding to is a problem we're having at the moment with one of the master students who's from Queen Mary's, who we wanted to take on and in their home office because he's from the EU. We have to go through the whole process, and on a technicality of a shortfall of some £400, we're going to lose this chap, which sounds absolutely ridiculous considering the added benefit that he would have to our company and our future growth. I probably can't say a huge amount about it, as we'll be taking this further with our office, but things like that. So I heard a lot about entrepreneurs' visas and visas for new recruits. Folks, I don't know if you run a software company. You might do, and if you do, I'm sure you're probably going to agree with me. It's very, very difficult to hire incredibly good and capable and talented developers and programmers. It's very difficult because they're already busy. They're already working. Those who are talented and capable are already well involved and engaged, or they command astronomical, and I mean six-figure sums, and reasonably junior too. So this is before their 30th birthday. So it's tough. Right now, if you look at what's happening with the jobs market in Tech City, someone told me this, and this is anecdotal, I don't know this for certain, but there's some 1,700 jobs that are open in Tech City that are actually open right now. And I can well believe that because we've got a few that's been open that are still open that we just can't find the right sort of suitable candidates for, unless they come from Queen Mary's. But quite seriously, it's a problem, and it doesn't help that the government who is insisting that they're here to help us at least be able to bring on board people who have good command of English. This chap's been educated here in Queen Mary's, with merit, and we can't keep him on, and they've made the process rather more complicated. So unless you pay a lawyer to go through it for you, if you go through it yourself, which is what we did, they're going to turn you down. Because there was some small thing that you didn't notice, and this flies in the face of simple English and making it easier for entrepreneurs to hire. So I don't have a particular message other than to say we're having a hard time with it, and it hasn't helped that the particular clause that applied to our thing is hidden in an annex of another annex as one single line. Unless you read 300 pages and understood it, you wouldn't be able to do it.
Thank you. Who's first?
Good evening. Wayne Kewell, Ministry of Defence. Cam, thank you very much on behalf of all of us for your presentation. I wonder if we might investigate a little bit the symbiotic relationship. There's also a paradox between gaming and the apparent difficult content from a parent's perspective of some of the military games. Yet from my perspective, the enormous utility of a gaming environment to practice something before you go into a conflict, or you go onto a battlefield for real. There is a brilliant relationship between the two. We're exploring it all the time. A lot of that is virtual reality that we're using. See-through capability, particularly in cockpits, being able to see through and using that technology to advance our ability to keep winning, which I hope you all want us to. But more importantly, the amount of money we're having to invest in that, because you guys are putting so much money into the game industry, we're able to draw on that. I'm working with Bob Stone at Birmingham University on it, you probably know. But it strikes me there's an opportunity here. If you're looking for people who might have that expertise that you need to convert into the most realistic output, are we perhaps somewhere you ought to be coming to gain that first-hand knowledge? Is there an opportunity?
Yeah, I believe so. It's interesting that you bring that up, because the MOD has been as a leader, and I would say the inventor very much of simulations, and going back even to the First World War with model aircraft with people actually moving the map underneath you as you were going, so all the way through to today. At some point there was a crossover, The consumer electronics market excelled at being able to manufacture incredible computing power for the use of gaming, because it's incredibly lucrative. So the technology that you'd find in today's PlayStation 3, for instance, was unheard of in defense, say 20 years ago. If you had that kind of capability, you would probably, work with one of the intelligence services, and you wouldn't want any of that kind of piece of kit to fall in people's hands. In fact, I think to this day, the US has some restrictions around the export of PlayStation 3s because they're considered supercomputers. Now, some of us, just have these things knocking around. Now, what's been happening in that space has been really a matching up of developers, games developers, entering into the defense space with, so for instance, the MOD purchasing BBS, and I've worked with folks like, you may know, like Andy Fawkes, who had a simulation on the civil side, and we worked with a number of PSTL on projects. I think it's a fascinating space, but if I was going to make a serious comment in some of the issues, is that the incumbent control most, and the incumbent leave very little space for the up and coming, and you know who they are, the kinetics, the BAEs, and they are set up in particular ways and even though a certain percentage of the budget is meant to go to SMEs, the follow-up is actually not as good as it could be, in that the STL does make contributions and investments, but the follow-ups is not always apparent. And those are issues around procurement, which is a nightmare in any large government organisation, and particularly working with young startups. To that end, we were in the process, and I still hope that we do get to run some sessions with some of these startups coming up through Digital Shoreditch and Tech City. I'm more than happy to talk to you about that in terms of some events that we could be put together to try and match up some of the technology which folks are developing for use, as you say, and helping us win. And actually, my preferred option is to not have to fight. Then you want it, best way of
Vicky, you're master of historical London,
Yeah. Well, just before I ask my question, can I just point out that the theatre isn't actually the first playhouse in Britain. The first playhouse in Britain was off the Mile End Road, called the Red Lion. It was built by two people who subsequently built the theatre. And this was the first purpose-built theatre. The theatre was the first purpose-built theatre with its own company, and of course had a much better play, so this guy really put on the screen. Anyway, I've decided for. Well, the question I wanted to ask was, in East London, we've got at least 3 universities. Do they talk to each other in order to, they might be duplicating things, they can learn from each other? Is it part of Shoreditch, digital Shoreditch, they do that sort of thing? I mean, particularly you mentioned lack of skilled people. For decades we've been trying to train people. Is anything happening there? But in a much wider scale as well. They're all doing 3D printing, all these other things. Is that part of Shoreditch? They talk to each other?
We certainly hope so, and we certainly would like that to occur more. Some universities are playing nicer than others. I shan't name any. And others are around the table on particular projects. For instance, the Creative Works project that brought together a whole raft of research and development establishments around London, some 26 together. It's let's put it this way. It's hard enough getting 2 departments within one university to work together, let alone 2 universities working together. What it comes down to, though, is individuals with the belief that this is that we will succeed better. And it's those individuals that drive it, that no matter how much rhetoric there may be from the top, it actually falls on the shoulders of people who want to work with others and who make these kind of things happen. I think from our experience of working with multiple universities on, say, on debt, it's quite obvious that there are different forces at work. So whilst one university may have a very academic perspective, and I don't mean, what do I mean by that? I mean in a kind of a, we are a font of knowledge, we want to bring people together, we want to explore things and find stuff, all is good and we're going to share everything. And others might be about, actually we want to this is a business for us. And I think that's the biggest challenge moving forward as universities are kind of changing their nature from being this kind of, and I know I'm not fooling myself by thinking that it's going to be business as usual, because it's certainly changed as universities have changed. As it's turning into more of a business and becomes a little more competitive, then actually those opportunities become fewer, and it becomes even more poignant that those who are keen on this collaboration step up and they find the time and space to work and collaborate together. So,
At the back, please.
I can. The key investment in tech city is the intellectual capital, right? So that's the web. Yeah. And we've already seen, say, sort of things being emulated in Dundee, where again you have this sort of creative district being built in Berlin. So where do you see the long-term sustainability of tech city continue to grow?
what we have in London, which we don't have in Berlin, is a financial capital, which is going to be one of the engines that's going to help drive the growth of this space. Whilst intellectual capital is the key thing, and I would say that perhaps Berlin has a few more engineers than we do. Germans seem to be very good at that. I wish we could just steal more. They don't have a financial centre like the Corporation of London with all its wealth sitting on their doorstep. You'd have to go to Frankfurt for that, and that's not that's not going to work for Berlin's positivity. So the real trick is, how do we get the folks in the city to start investing on their doorstep? How do we get people, VCs, and the folks who are, as far as I'm aware, still paying £1 out of every 4 that goes into HMRC, at least from London? How do we get those folks to invest? Because one thing's for sure in this business of tech, if you want to be big, and I mean, not a web company that's making websites, I mean a Google or a Facebook or a Twitter. If you want to be big, you need an enormous amount of capital before you can properly monetize and turn it into a business. A few days ago, I was very lucky to meet one of the founders of YouTube, who briefly told the story of how they once he'd exited from PayPal, they pumped in all the cash they could into this thing called YouTube, which he'd named and created. And at the sort of the height of it running, it was costing them about $1 million a month in paying for bandwidth fees. And by the time Google signed the deal, they were literally weeks away from being absolutely destitute. They had spent millions and millions of dollars of their own money that they'd got, and everything they could borrow and beg. And it was very lucky that Google bought them for $1.5 billion. Obviously, instantly making 40 people a millionaire and making many times what they invested. But let's not kid ourselves that if we are to create those companies, we are going to need an enormous amount of capital, not just intellectual capital, but the cash to pay for it and to pay for the expansion.
Just to follow that up, while we're here, the secondary invitation of the evening, Boris Johnson's opening level 39 at Canary Wharf tonight. Europe's largest fintech accelerator. Ben, please.
My name's Ben Draper, I'm a former student with Mary, studying in Ireland Group, now work for a public affairs agency. So I'm quite interested in the role that Tech City has, the interaction that Tech City has with government. I know there are some funds available from, I think, for terms of small tech startups, but lots of people have criticised it for simply not being agile enough, not being quick enough to deliver funding, when exactly that point is made. Some really great ideas can go under without capital. do you think the government needs to change the way it interacts with small companies like those that exist in the tech city, or is it simply not suitable for this kind of a role?
There are different problems here. One is the startup. I've got an idea. Can I have 50 grand of your hard-earned cash, please? Because I'm going to make a website. Great. That's one side of it. There's the other side of it, which is I run a company, I've made something, it's going to save you an enormous amount of money, Mr. Government, Mrs. Government. I think Mr. Government sounds like that. I don't know, whichever. The government. And I could save you X amount. Why won't you use my services? So they're quite different things. I think in the former, I would probably say, I didn't know anything about this. This is the first time I've heard it, so I don't know about it.
It's called the Technology Strategy Board.
Oh, the Technology Strategy Board, okay. I was going to say, it's...
I don't know if it was actually based in Biz, but it's
Right, okay. So the Technology Strategy Board had £1 billion spent over 3 years. That's about £1 million a day to invest in technology. According to Vince Cable's, one of Vince Cable's speech, and I'm sure it's not his, somebody giving it to him, for every pound that the Technology Strategy Board gives out, there's £7 generated in the economy. That sounds pretty amazing. Let's keep them spending that £1 million a day. That's great. They are based on East Road now, in a place called Can Mezzanine, and they run a very kind of substantial and a whole variety of different competition-style, technology-focused, events and competitions to do everything with fintech. We've got one coming up to fashion, to everything in between. Is it the same people that keep applying for them? Well, perhaps, and those of you here who might have worked with Framework 7 or any other frameworks in the previous European Commission, you'd recognise that you keep putting in all the same quality things, and that probably does happen to some degree. Is it very easy to get it? Probably not. It's a bit of a kind of a roulette. You never can tell why you were picked. I have a theory that if you read it and it sounds completely unplausible, then that's the kind of time that we'll get the project. I don't know if any of you are doing a project where you wrote the thing and you thought, yeah, we'll never give this as a harebrained idea, and they pick it. So my advice to anyone filling in a form is basically make it sound like it's impossible to make, and you'll get it. What you do with that there is it's not the government's role necessarily to be bankrolling startups. It is, however, their role to foster innovation where they can. And through Technology Strategy Board, that's been one of the, and actually SPRI, which is the Small Business Research grant that the MOD it also gives out grants to. It's possible to work with folks like the MOD through SPRI to make demonstrators of things that these things exist. It's never money for free. I'm not going to mention the government's new scheme of a 6% loan, which they are calling it money for free, but again, I can't name it. But you may pass you, basically it's a 6% loan that they give you. Correct. I don't think that's the answer either, especially when you're just starting out. But these things exist. It just depends on what your focus is. And what I've found in this wonderful country of ours is whatever it is that you really want to do. If you really want to do it, somebody will help you do it. It's not like many other places in the world where we are beaten down and never are given a chance to flourish.
Thank you. Ian Warden, Queen Mary. The broadcast media in the UK is incredibly successful compared to the rest of Europe, partly because of where it sits between the US and Europe. And I just was interested in your opinion to what extent that is benefiting Tech City as well, that position, rather than the finance position which you've already mentioned, but its actual position between the Silicon Valley that you showed a picture of and we may be chalk and cheese, but we're benefiting from that unique position. And the second part of that is the government had a very pro-broadcast media regulation framework. You mentioned the employment problems you've had, but I was just interested in any other regulatory barriers or benefits that you think the UK has.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned broadcasting and Tech City, because the last time I looked, it's all going to Manchester and to Salford, which is not a bad thing. I'm not against Salford. Of course, I'm going to have we're going to be like, why don't you just keep it in London? And of course, we shouldn't do that. Be so London-centric. I think in terms of outside broadcast, probably stepping slightly outside broadcast and looking at the kind of the broader media. And by media I mean advertising and branding and marketing. Look, we've got some of the largest and the most decorated creative companies in the world by measure of awards. So all you have to do is go and find a very famous award for creativity, count out how many of those winners are based in London or have a HQ in London, and we're always pretty much in the top 3, if not number 1. I don't know why we are so incredibly creative in England, and particularly in London. I can't tell you exactly why, but in terms of regulations, I know very little actually about media regulations, so I can't really comment. What I would say is that our position is unique, and people do come from all over the world. To have someone in London work on their creative strategy, because we know from enormously successful campaigns time after time that there's people who are around here who are coming up with these crazy ideas that are transforming brands and making them a ton of money and winning lots of awards. So there must be some magic here somewhere. As far as regulation is concerned, I don't really know.
Very forward from UEL. Is there a relationship between Tech City and the thing that Boris is opening in Canary Wharf and the media centre, the iCity possible project in Olympic Park, and the digital peninsula in Greenwich that they're trying to rebrand? Is there any relation between them? Should there be one?
People, definitely people. So Level 39 is brainchild of Eric van der Klee, who was the CEO of Tech City. So there's a direct relationship there. Many of the people who are involved in the Greenwich Digital Peninsula are active generally within the kind of digital space in London. And iCity, well, that's an interesting one. I used to live in that part of the world before it got to be what it got to be today, and I'm very happy that it's grown. I'm very happy that the Olympics happened. I'm very happy that the whole area was regenerated. It's 1 billion square feet. Right? It's an awful lot of square feet. If it helps bring down some of the rent, great, because we are paying more and more and more by the square millimetre, it feels. Certainly, when I compare the rent we paid 12 years ago to now, I just can't believe it. It's about 4 or 5-fold. It's enormously, that could be a problem, especially for startups. I certainly think that there is, and I've met some of the folks who are behind iCity, and I know that they're involved in that, but it's really the people, and yes, there is a relationship. When David Cameron at the end of 2010 stood at the podium and said he wanted to make London the premier city for early VC money, so this is venture capital money, you can kind of see now that sort of two years on, 2 and a bit years on, when Boris opens this centre for fintech, financial technology, which is going to, of course, right in the heart of Canary Wharf, is going to attract a heck of a lot of interested parties who deal in that space. You can kind of see that these things are perhaps coming to fruition. It's not necessarily that that it wouldn't have happened without him saying so, though, right?
steps. I mean, setting up a business in the UK is probably the easiest thing to do, right? I can't imagine, it's certainly a heck of a lot harder to open a bank account. The problems that you have trying to open a bank account are enormous compared to opening a business. Opening a business is filling a page, paying £15, and that's it. You've got a business. So in terms of kind of the fast track, the other issues around are around employment, around setting out the terms, but most of the time it's not the fact that it's difficult to do, it's just the people involved are doing it for the first time. So you don't know what you don't know, and you haven't been through it before, so you don't know what pitfalls there are, and you may not know exactly what options you might have, quite literally, in the way that you structure things. And what's generally out there isn't really set up for businesses of a kind of a high-tech nature. So whilst there are a lot of trodden paths, if you're going to open a florist, you know, if you're going to open a particular web technology firm and employ people, there will be all sorts of issues around intellectual property and licensing and the setup of them, especially if you're raising capital and everything that goes around it. I think there is, however, there's a lot from, at least what I see from what crosses my desk, an awful lot of training and learning out there, lots of events. And one of the things that's amazing about this area is any night of the week, if you fancy hanging out with a load of geeks, it's guaranteed something's going on, right? From whether it's, you know, the campus building that Google put up to the Mother, or to other meetups, or it's a Friday night so they can drink about, or any of these things. There's always something going on. And if I guess, you know, if you're a kind of a techie that doesn't leave their desk, less likely to be an entrepreneur. But if you are an entrepreneur, it's not that difficult to find like-minded people and to be able to kind of start to soak some of that knowledge up. It's certainly a world apart to how it was even 3 years ago. I mean, you know, we would know that there was a drinkabout coming up in 3 years. We'd all know, and now there's one every day. So, you know, that's changed. So it's great to know that knowledge is flowing, but yet still problems will exist, because when it comes to the specific nitty-gritty of something, you haven't done it before, you might not be able to straight away find someone who has done it. So
I'm really impressed that you got from law to specific nitty-gritty to alcohol.
they're all related, right? It's not necessarily in that order.
Bill Spence, Queen Mary, you mentioned it was difficult to find highly qualified staff in some areas. That was pleasing that you were employing some Queen Mary graduates. I was wondering if you thought there are things the university should be doing more of to encourage people into these sort of jobs, and internships, or expanding other areas of activity.
What I'm about to say is probably slightly controversial and probably highly impractical for most departments to be able to do. It's something that many universities that I've seen, Derby University, all of them, has somehow managed to instigate, which is to have a working week for students where they start at 9 and they finish at 6 every single day. The biggest problem for a new startup is the fact that they can't work 40 hours a week, because they've never worked 40 hours a week. And you know, the temptation after 5 minutes to go and do something different is enormous. I find myself continuously at times saying to startups, sit down please, carry on doing what you were doing please, just get back to it please, because they're just not used to it, and it takes them time. It takes 3 to 6 months for them to kind of settle in. And most universities kind of get around that by saying, oh, we'll send you on a year's kind of thing. Well, you know what, that doesn't really prepare them. As I said, this is kind of very difficult to actually establish a sort of a full working week. But if there was one magic one, I'd say, please, get them to just work a full working week.
John Locke, University of East London. I mean, it's clear that Tech City has genuinely expanded, not just because you found more companies you didn't find the first time. But as is the way of these things, just because the government says something, it doesn't mean the market or business is going to do it.
True.
It's unlikely that Texas even move towards central London, because we're paying even more rent. But it could go south, it could go east, it could go north.
Yes.
What, I mean, you seem to have identified two factors that actually would influence that kind of decision making, which is the existence of bars, and by extension cafes and sandwich shops,
Yes.
and reasonable rents,
Yes.
and to some degree offices that are congenial. Is there anything else in that mix, or is it that simple? Apart from maybe the
No, that's
broadband?
pretty important. Those are three pretty important things. What else do you need? You need anchors. You need an anchor. You know, you need someone of gravity, of recognition, to go, oh, we're here. That is important.
Who did that in Brexit?
Oh, this was, we've been around for ages. Since, you know, it's I think it's evolved. And okay, so if I'm going throwing through my head, the T building, which was a derelict warehouse up until the early 2000s, was converted. And one of the companies that moved in was Mother, a very large, very profitable advertising agency that employs some 200 people now in the UK and has branches all around the world. Because they are such a force to be reckoned with, I mean, with a name like Mother, they are a force to be reckoned with. I gathered the Queen was due there last week, although she couldn't make it. That made a lot of companies who were kind of starting going, where should I be? Well, I tend to work with brands, and why not be in a close proximity to, you know, obviously Shoreditch House, which was enormously important. After Soho House, and as a place where media types go to hang out, and it's a good place to take a client, and it's also it's not an advertisement for the place, by the way. I'm not a member, but nonetheless, if you are in the media space, it's a fantastic meeting place. So that felt like there was a step up. You know, when in the media space, those guys moved in, and more recently, of course, Tech Hub starting in 2010 and doing so brilliantly. Almost, you know, it seems like it's magic in a way. And when you look at the numbers and look at what the Elizabeth Wiley and Mike Butcher together have managed to pull off, it is incredible. It certainly helped that Mike Butcher is the number one person in web tech in the country by all Twitter's account, at least anyway, and he's the editor of TechCrunch, which is one of the most influential web-based media agencies in the world, media outlets. It's almost like if FT moved in somewhere, you know, and you said, oh well, you're a finance company. You know, come and stay in the same space as the person who's the editor of FT is running. Oh, of course, sounds great. So that was hugely influential in the growth of the space. It suddenly made people go, where should I go? Oh, look, that's where I should go. And people come where people are. It's just the way people are. We just tend to go where people are of the same type. And so most recently, I think, with Google Campus opening, the effect that's had has been interesting in that almost all of the shared working spaces are expanding, and in a frightening rate. The Trampery, for those of you who know it, it's a shared working space. They're opening up something like 30,000 new square feet. That sounds amazing. The Hoxton Mix, which is another shared space, has just opened 2 more floors, and they're opening some more. Tech Hub itself has expanded. So all these shared working spaces are growing rapidly and much, much quicker than we thought. We recently moved from one accelerator, which was run by London Met on Kingston Road, to Unruly. The space became available mid-December. I had a chat. I happened to know them. I said, we'd love to move in with you. You know, we love you guys. You know, you've worked with us before. And they said, well, you're our first tenants. And it wasn't, I think we made it into the first week of January before there was a waiting list because it was already full. So there is enormous growth, and actually there isn't enough space, and so we end up having to fight. The prices are going up, and it's a shame that places like some of the offices in the city haven't really latched on to the fact that they could probably let some of their floors that they've got empty sitting around at the moment. So I'm thinking of the Broadgate Tower, which has got many empty floors. Why don't you just give it to us, or pay, we'll pay rent, but there's space there. Interestingly, in the 80s, 40% of the commercial property in Shoreditch was empty. It was derelict. The place was, I don't know, I didn't come to this part of London until the 90s, and even then it was pretty bad. But in the 80s it was derelict, and now it's gone completely the opposite way. So yes, if you have the space and you have casual places for people to meet, and you have some type of an anchor, a purpose, for a reason for people to get there in the first place, once it's bitten, once it's sown, I think you'll find that there will be huge growth. Even though we live in this space that in this time it's supposed to be everything electronic, everything, you can work in your pajamas. I don't want to work in my pajamas. Work with my colleagues in somewhere where there are other interesting companies doing interesting stuff.
Make city films with the Margie wore a whistle.
Cam, what are your thoughts on what Eric Nichols is doing around the changing of use of buildings to residential to commercial without permission?
If this was a gun, and this was the entrepreneurs, he's literally doing this, and he's about to pull the trigger. This is the worst possible thing that a minister could be pushing through. It is unbelievable. Look, you get more rent from housing than you get from offices. That's true. So as a landlord, you'd rather be getting more rent. So we're turning to domestic and sort of housing. The area Shoreditch is a very sought after place to work. We already don't have enough offices. We're already pushed to pay the maximum amounts that we can. And it does mean that some people are going to move out, but it does mean that some people are just squeezing out wrongly. What he's proposing is terrible. Basically, it would mean that we will lose even more of our office space, then what is left will be even more expensive, and frankly, it will probably kill it. It'll kill that vibrant thing. So the T building will convert into flats, and everything with it, and all the companies around there would have to give way to people's living accommodations. There's no thought behind that other than let's do something for landlords so they can make even more money. This is not a policy that is good for enterprise under any stretch of imagination. This is purely a policy that's designed for landlords to make them more money, and he's sending a signal that this government is not serious about enterprise, does not want to support its dire needs, and is quite happy to turn a blind eye and let it go to waste. So, as you can probably tell, I'm extremely against it.
Sam Robinson, QMU. Given the disjointed nature that you're describing, we had an event, a MEG event a few weeks ago with Lord Mulgrave, Lord Sainsbury and Dave Willits, and there was a lot of talk about DARPA or even ARPA with almost a sort of reverence. Do you believe your industry or Tech City could benefit from a government organisation such as DARPA or ARPA, similar in structure?
So DARPA kicked off Silicon Valley by investing, is it $60 billion? If somebody wants to put in $60 billion, we'll come out with something. I don't know what it'll be. Maybe it'll be a cloaking device or something.
Maybe not this government, but the next government.
Potentially. Look, one of the things that worries me, when you said the next government, one of the things that worries me is the transient nature of governments and the fact that we're going to be here, whether our current Prime Minister is Prime Minister in 5 years' time. We're going to be here. And what worries me in a way is if the Eye of Mordor, you know, when the Eye of Mordor moves away from us, you know, will we be able to shine on our own? And I would argue we were shining before, and we will shine after. You know, so whether or not the Tech City torch gets carried, I sincerely hope that it gets established to such a degree that of course it's called Tech City. But you know, let's not forget that places like Singapore and Dubai also have tech cities. So you know, if we're going to play for Tech City globally, we're going to have to bring out something special, and that's going to require an enormous amount of investment. And something like DARPA, you know, we won't have the same budget, I know that, but something like that. And let's not, you know, forget, if you don't know, folks, DARPA is a defence advanced something, I don't know, research project agency. There you go. Yeah, so it's very defence led. So perhaps this could be a place for everybody to step in. And they had a huge impact on the growth of Silicon Valley. So certainly won't say no to it, and I have no idea how likely it is that will happen. But I certainly hope that the next government isn't going to go, oh well, we're going to call it Cheese City from now on, because you know the last government called it Tech City, so we call it the Un-Tech City or something terrible. I certainly hope that will happen. Whether or not the Labour will stick, watch this space, who knows.
Last question of you.
Heath Raymond, student on technology at the university. With the talk of like different ways for companies to get funding through governments or like startup accelerators, I'd like to hear your opinions on crowdfunding with platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo taking off like record speed.
Yeah, for sure. So Kickstarter has what, a 3% success rate? Okay, I'll take my chances. Look, what's important in the space of crowdfunding to remember is that, one, there are many different models of crowdfunding. You could give away equity at places like Crowdcube and Seeders, where you put up equity and people invest in your idea. You could be a bit cleverer than that and not give away any equity, but pre-sell your yet unmade product, which is Kickstarter, which is, I've got this device which I've not made, I've not even researched it, but I can make a very good video of, which you can pay for right now, and I'll get the money, thank you very much, and I'll give it to you in 5 years' time. So it fits a particular kind of audience. The audience responds very well to celebrity, the audience responds very well to known individuals who've got a track record. It responds far less to the kind of the unproven, unless the idea is truly remarkable. And let's face it, most ideas aren't. And the success rate is very low compared to how you might do it. Now, is it a good way to go? Yes, it's a way to go. I prefer the Kickstarter method than have people invest in my company, because what Kickstarter does is, you know, I'm going to make a widget. You pre-sell it. That's how you raise the money. It's brilliant. You don't give any of your equity away. You don't give any of your IP away. You've already sold 100,000 units, and you haven't even finished researching it or manufacturing it. Wonderful. That's amazing. And they do operate in the UK now. So my advice would be, if you can make it on Kickstarter, I would go Kickstarter first, then you know, places like Crowdcube or Seeders. And you know, the other part of and I'm not at all averse to crowdfunding, but remember that all those shareholders, you know, you may have to somehow listen to them, and do you really want to have 300 people who are now your partner? Yes, in some cases, and definitely in others, so watch out for that.
Thank you very much. Oh, there is a last question.
Yeah, one more. I was just going to ask what would be your kind of concluding thoughts if the government, central government, changes and the Eye of Mordor is looking another way. What would you say to Hackney Council, Islington Council, Tower Hamlets, universities in the area to help continue growth? How we can best help?
Well, I hope that the initiatives that have been created won't disappear with that. And I think that's what I was alluding to, that I hope that once this opportunity is moved on, the connections that we make will remain. Certainly we intend for digital shortage to be something that will carry on, and whilst that's just a festival that happens once a year, there are other more regular events, and that community is important. I would very much doubt that if Tech City Investment Organisation was ceased to be tomorrow, that there would be any difference in that. I'm not saying they're irrelevant, they are relevant, but they don't make any difference to us right now, to the individual workings of the company. It's been brilliant that they've brought in some big hitters, and they've established them, and certainly drawn a lot of people in. And I hope that they continue to do that more, because that is definitely something we need. More big names, and establishing us as, you know, the technical, the creative tech capital of the world.
Thank you.
Well, I thought that was wonderful, and I'm very, very pleased, as I'm sure you are, that it wasn't boring for all sorts of reasons. Please, hello. Please join us for a drink, and would you join me in thanking Catherine?
James,